Hi, this is Dan Bullard, retired electronics engineer, sitting out in front of my houseboat again. It's November, sun's kind of shining. It was raining like hell last night. And I want to show you, here's where I go swimming. And yes, I dive right in there. It's like 16 feet deep, kind of minimum in the summertime. Late summer it gets down to like 12 feet deep, but you can still dive in 12 feet of water. And it's clean down there. I've got a underwater camera that I use. I can look around. It looks good down there. Okay, I want to talk to you about ASK and amplitude modulation. Everybody knows amplitude modulation, and I showed you some stuff on amplitude modulation. Now, some people get it wrong. Now, how you could get amplitude modulation wrong, I don't know. I mean, you can do the math to create sine waves, but these people didn't use sine waves. Now, how do I know they're not sine waves? Well, they don't look like sine waves to me, and there's only one way to be sure. I didn't want to show you a good AM waveform because I don't really know if it's a good waveform or not, but if you do an FFT on it, you can find out pretty quickly. And so if you do an FFT on something that's handmade like that, it's not going to look good, but I don't know how to put an image that I pull off of the web into a waveform and then do an FFT on it. My patent is in ASK, amplitude shift keying, and that's the smart card thing. When you wave your credit card over a reader and you're trying to buy stuff or whatever. Here's some waves that I saw on ASK. I can't believe it, again, why you would simulate ASK with something that's not a sine wave. That's really, really bad. Another thing I want to mention is I know a lot of people with degrees, and I sent a copy of my book to my brother-in-law. He's got a master's degree and a thriving business, apparently. He must think I'm nuts. He must think I'm crazy. And that's the only thing I can say. I can't get him to talk to me about it. And I mean, a review would be nice, but he's a relative, he should be able to at least do that. Even if he says Dan doesn't know what he's fucking talking about, I would have that as an arrow in my quiver to say, hey, look, here's a guy with a master's degree who says, I don't know what I'm talking about. In his business, he does a lot of simulations in SPICE and OrCAD SPICE. And I found this on OrCAD SPICE simulation accuracy. Simulation accuracy is limited to, this is from them, this is from their website. Simulation accuracy is limited to about 3 to 3.5 digits, about 60 to 70 dB. The accuracy can be improved, but not much. So, what kind of accuracy am I getting? In that one video I did, I showed you I was getting 7 digits below the decimal point, or a total of 10 digits. And that's the kind of accuracy I can get with that. Now, I can do better because I was only looking at the first part of the spectrum. But if I look at the entire spectrum, I could fine-tune this. God, I can get 100 digits. I guarantee you. I can get 100 digits for the phase angle, but nobody else can even get close to the phase angle. Nobody even knows phase angle is an issue. And so, I was talking about this to somebody on LinkedIn. Boy, these people come out of the woodwork, kind of like Tony. They come out of the woodwork sometimes. And these guys jumped out there and just ripped me to shreds, said, accuracy of a simulation is a variable thing, Well, my simulations aren't variable. I mean, you've seen some of the things that I've done. It's really incredible the kind of accuracy I can get. Now, some people, I did this post on LinkedIn, and some people had comments, and a couple people were really mean about it. This one guy, Cheng Huang, bravo! I worked at Tektronix, maker of measurement instruments. Resistor values are accurate to a certain point. Oh, he's bragging that he worked at Tektronix. That's funny. If you know me, you know I worked at Tektronix too. And Tektronix was among the worst places I ever worked. the most backward, the Chinese Ministry of Aerospace was number one. Number two was Tektronix. Tektronix and Raytheon. And they were so bad. They didn't know how to do an FFT. They didn't know what an FFT was. They didn't know how to calculate the peak amplitude from a signal with noise in it. They didn't know how to get the noise out. They didn't have to do nothing. So, yeah, this guy's bragging. I worked at Tektronix, maker of measurements and instruments, blah, blah, blah. And so I commented, I worked at Tektronix too. I wouldn't brag about it. They're all idiots. They all seem to think that the FFT is just a button on a scope. And that's true. Unlike Charles Van Loan, he wrote that the FFT was the most important mathematical discovery of the 20th century. So that's what Tektronix says. It's just a button on a scope. Now, this brought back something that was kind of interesting to me. When I was at Tektronix, and it was really crazy, we had these weekly meetings where they would go around the room and ask you what your status was, what you're working on, and what kind of things you were doing. And everybody would go through their stuff, and maybe somebody could pipe in and say, "Hey, I've done that, or I can help you with that, or oh yeah, we did that over here, and let me give you the code for that." And so one thing that I was doing was I was integrating. Remember that Teradyne A585? I was integrating that into Tektronix's network, and one of the things I had to do is I had to take data that was captured from these parts and put it into a common database. And the data wasn't in a standard format, and I needed to modify it to be in a standard format and then upload it to the server so it could sit there for the other people to look at and who knows what. Now, this was like a job made for a tool like AWK. Okay. Now, and it was on a Solaris machine. So Solaris had AWK. Everything that has Unix has AWK. AWK is great. AWK is awesome. It's one of my favorite tools. It's the most difficult to look at because it doesn't mean anything unless you know how AWK works. But I wrote this really cool thing that used AWK to parse the data, straighten it out, get the milliamps and the microhenries and all that stuff straightened out. And then I changed the data into a file that could be uploaded to the database, and I did that. It was like a 3-line piece of code, It was pretty cool. And so I did that, and so I mentioned that in the meeting, that I did AWK. I used AWK to do this stuff. And like I said, I love AWK. AWK is fantastic. Somebody piped up at this meeting and says, AWK? You're using AWK? What the hell is AWK? Why don't you use Perl? I'm like, Perl? AWK is on the Teradyne. It's in Solaris. It's part of every Unix release. And Perl is not. And so I would have to dump Perl onto that A585. And boy, things can go bad when you try to put software on a Unix machine. Seriously bad. So I didn't know Perl at the time. I know Perl now, and it's like, it's the worst of AWK and SED and everything. Perl it's not terrible. It's just, I can do it with AWK, So this guy's like, oh, why don't you use Perl? Because I use AWK, and I know AWK. I can get around on AWK just great. If you're a real programmer, if you really know what you're doing, you know AWK. And you know SED, and you know all the other things like that, those Unix functions. And like I said, I could do stuff in AWK with one line, and it took me 3 lines to do this thing for these files, these data log files. 3 lines of code. That's all it took. But Perl, I don't know. It could take forever. It could take a whole bunch of stuff. And so my boss, Brian Brokaw, piped up and said, oh, Dan's kind of old school. He likes to do things the old way. And so he does things differently. Now, you know me, I'm a Mac guy. And so when he said that, I'm like, boy, I was steaming, And I'm like, You know who else does things differently? Steve Jobs. And so I wrote an email to Brian and to my coworkers, and I said, hey, think different. You got to think different. You got to know what you're doing. And if you don't know AWK, you've got to learn Perl. And then you have to load Perl on the A585. And how's that going to go? It may not go well. I mean, I had a lot of problems with working at Tektronix. And that's why I don't feel like these guys feel. Oh, God, I never worked at Tektronix. It was a great place. It was one of the worst places I worked. I worked at Motorola. I worked at, oh my God, Delco in Kokomo, Indiana. I read my book, Reluctant Road Warrior. I worked at all these different places. And I used pseudonyms because I didn't want to piss anybody off, but I used pseudonyms for the companies I worked at. But I worked at all these companies. Motorola was among the best. Delco was among the worst. And the absolute worst was Tektronix. And I had a friend, and I mentioned him. He was a fellow boater. We got together on the river one time, and I ended up going to lunch with him one time. And I was joking with him a little bit. I said, did you work at Tektronix? And apparently he did. That was a mistake to even mention that, because people think Tektronix is like the bee's knees, okay? It's like the greatest thing ever. And he didn't appreciate my negative comments, so that's the last time we ever spoke, It was the shortest lunch and then the longest lunch. Once I did that, it was like, eat your food and get out of here, we're done. So, anyway, I'm a nice guy, I try not to be an asshole, but, if you tell me, oh, I worked at Tektronix, I'm an expert at everything, you don't know nothing. And just because you have a master's degree, I suspect you more than anybody, even more than a guy with a bachelor's degree. If you got a bachelor's degree, at least you can change, you can be nudged in the right direction. If you've got a master's degree, a PhD, you believe you're God's gift to the world, and there's no changing you. That's like, Bruce Tibbets, Bruce Tibbets believes he's God's gift to the universe, and he doesn't have any kids. If you don't have any kids, you're proving that you don't know how to fuck a woman. So, if you have a master's degree, I'm sorry, I probably can't help you. If you've got a bachelor's degree, you've got a chance. Anyway, I think I better go. The wind's starting to come up. So once again, from the river, this is Dan Bullard. See ya.